How's this? Can you hear me? It helps to turn devices on, by the way.
Alternate Commissioner Young. Do we have a motion to approve of the previous meeting's minutes? That would be from September 13th. Commissioner Dunn?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner McConnell?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is passed. Comments were accepted electronically and via voicemail and were delivered to the Planning Commission and posted to the public agenda prior to the meeting. Those who wish to give comments and signed up in advance per the online guidelines will be called upon in order to speak during the meeting.
There's one item on the agenda this evening, item 3A, public hearing and action on a sign variance request for Pechang's at 14416 Delaware Street.
Thank you. I hereby open the public hearing for action on sign variance request for Pechang's at 14416 Delaware Street. I believe Jacob Kaza has a presentation.
Thank you, Chairperson Boschert. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jacob Kaza. I am a senior planner with the city's planning division. I'd like to point out very quickly that we received one written comment, and that comment has been provided to all of the commissioners at their desks, and there is one copy of that comment on the back table. Those are all the public comments that we received. Next slide, please. As a part of bringing this project before you, a staff agenda memo has been created and tonight's public hearing has been properly noticed. The agenda memo, its associated attachments, tonight's PowerPoint presentation, the public notices published in the Westminster window, the mailed notices, and the posted notices are hereby entered into the public record at this time. The notices of the public hearing were mailed to 9 property owners within 300 feet of each of the parcels under consideration tonight. The city has also posted the hearing date and time on its website. Next slide, please. Here is a map of the Pechang's location. The restaurant site is outlined in red. The parcel is located at the northeast corner of West 144th Avenue and Delaware Street. Next slide, please. The sign variance request is for 2 proposed incidental signs. The variance is for 3 separate dimensional requirements. First, a request for one of the signs to encroach into the setback. Second, a request to exceed the maximum allowed height for both signs. Last, a request to exceed the cumulative maximum allowed sign area. All 3 requests exceed the threshold that could be approved administratively. Next slide, please. The applicant provided a site plan with their variance request. The site plan shows the 2 proposed incidental freestanding signs at the northeast corner of the building and the southwest corner of the building. The sign at the southwest corner of the building is the one that encroaches into the required setback. Next slide, please. The applicant provided an elevation of the 2 proposed identical signs. The elevation shows the requested height of 14 feet and the requested sign area of 134.12 square feet per sign. Sign area is measured as 1 rectangle encompassing all sign elements, including the sign base. Next slide, please. Section 11.11.13b of the Westminster Municipal Code provides 6 criteria that must be met for the Planning Commission to approve a sign variance. Staff finds that 2 of the 6 criteria have not been met. The first criteria is that the property has a special circumstance or condition that would restrict the effectiveness of the sign. In the applicant's own narrative, they acknowledge that there are no conditions that would restrict the effectiveness of the horses. The second criteria is that the approval of the variance would not weaken the purpose of the sign regulations, the comprehensive plan, or the zoning district. Staff finds that the variance would weaken the purpose of the sign regulations as it would allow for a 90% encroachment into the setback a 100% increase in height, and a 670% increase in sign area. Other businesses and restaurants would see this approval as an unfair advantage, and they would approach the city with similar requests for increased signs. Staff finds that the last four criteria are met. Next slide, please. Staff's recommendation is to hold a public hearing and deny the requested sign variance. Next slide, please. The applicant is with us tonight and has a presentation to share with you as well. Thank you for your attention, and we'd also be happy to answer. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. And you guys can go ahead.
Before the applicant makes the presentation, I have a question for you. From your presentation, it sounds like you're only against the southwest corner statuette, or is it both that you are against?
So staff is opposing both of the proposed incidental signs.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Thanks for hearing us this evening. My name's Howard Kahn. I'm the market partner with P.F. Chang's for the Colorado and Las Vegas market. I don't have a clicker, but say next slide. Next slide. You've already shown this one, so we can go again. Next slide, please. And this is just some artist renderings and pictures of the restaurants that are already in the Orchard Town Center shopping center, just to give you all a visual and bring some memory back for you folks. You could go ahead to the next slide, please. And then this is more of the center and just shows where the location is adjacent to the entrance to the shopping center. Next slide, please. And this was the building before we took it over. It was previously a Mimi's Cafe, and we've done more adjustments to it as opposed to demoing and rebuilding the building, but definitely built in our image. Next slide, please. And here's a shot that gives you an indication of what the horses would look like in the front of the building. They will actually act as a bollard in the entrance to prevent traffic from driving through the building. If you think about a Target center where they have the big balls out in front, those horses could act as a bollard as well. So next slide, please. I just wanted to speak for a minute about my experiences with the brand for the last 5 years. And I know there's a concern about the weakening of the regulations. These horses, while the Westminster regulations would call them an incidental sign, there's nothing on those horses that bring attention to, as a sign would bring. Our guests that identify where our building is identify it from the signs that we have on the sides of the building. But the horses are more about the experience for the guest. And from my experience with my 13 locations throughout here in Las Vegas, it's definitely a photo shoot for our guests, and it's really more a part of the experience for the guests. And I can only imagine when we open our location in Westminster and don't have our horses out front, the amount of questions that we'll receive from the general public as to where our horses are, because it's really baked into the fabric of our brand and what we do and how we do it. It's more about the artwork. And, I think with what Westminster does with the public art in the community, that this just extends that fabric into the community and really feel like it's more about, an experiential experience more so than these being an incidental sign. I'm going to ask you to come on and speak to some of the other regulations.
Yeah. Sorry, my name is Sean Harris. I'm project manager for the architect of record for the project. I don't know if we have to go through the whole presentation because I think Jacob mostly went through a lot of it. And on the agenda, there are the kind of artist renderings at the end of the P.F. Chang's with the horses in front. And I kind of want to directly address the kind of 2 points that are not approved or not. The criteria is not met. So one of them, the first one is a little, I guess I'm not understanding fully, but one is regard to setback. The southwest corner horse is right up against the property line. If we move it 10 feet farther back, and if you go back to, I guess one of the Mimi's Cafe images on slide 3, I think, or 4, you notice that there are some really mature existing trees right out in front. And if we push it back any farther, the trees will affect how you see that, I guess, as you're driving by or as you're walking by, and you get that kind of experience of walking by the P.F. Chang's and looking at it. And like we were talking about, the experiential aspect of the horse in general. And there was also something mentioned in the agenda as well that I guess putting it inside would be a potential option. Putting the horse inside, and it wouldn't be considered a sign, but that kind of impacts the revenue of the business. We have to remove seats, and then you can't have as many people, and then people wait longer, and it doesn't become as good of an experience, I guess, when you're in that environment where you have to wait so long. We talked about the tree issue, and then weakening sign regulations. We talked about that already. It's really an experiential factor when you go to a P.F. Chang's and you walk by the horse and take a photo of the horse. There's no letters or numbers, and that's why I don't think we call it a sign. I know that that's part of the code, but it really takes me back to something that you experience. And I know Westminster has a public art program, and it could be kind of integrated into that public art program. It's just on whether we put it in one category or the other, and sometimes it's a gray area. We know that it's a branded kind of horse, but I think if you put the horse in any other situation, not in front of a P.F. Chang's, I don't know that a lot of people would think of it as a P.F. Chang's horse. So I guess that's why we kind of think about it as a gray area, not initially being a sign, even though it is kind of a branded statue, let's call it. So yeah, that's why we don't think it'll weaken the sign regulations, because a lot of people won't think of it as a sign. They'll think about it as a statue, an artistic, experiential piece. I think that's all we have. Thank you for your time.
Any questions that we can address or answer for you? Sorry. Are there any questions I could answer or attempt to answer?
Any questions? Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few questions. First, the horses themselves, do they have your P.F. Chang words on them? Do they have arrows pointing to the building? Do they have any language on them whatsoever?
No, they're just a statue out front. There's no language, no arrows. It's not a directional sign. It's literally a statue.
Okay, I got it. All right. Second, you said something about the trees. Can you repeat what you were trying to say with the trees? Because I kind of got lost there.
Can we go to slide 3? In front of the site, in front of the intersection, on the southwest corner, the slide before this. The top right corner, that's the view looking from the main intersection there to the Mimi's Cafe. And one of the horses is kind of sitting right behind the sign for the center, the Orchard Town Center sign. That's where we're locating. That's where the property line is. If we push it back to be within the setback of, I think, 10 feet, it's going to impact those big, mature trees right in front that are supposed to be existing to remain. It might even be behind it or under it, and the canopy of the tree might cover it. So it really won't be impactful if we put it 10 feet behind the setback.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. And then you brought up the public art question. Why are you coming to us as a sign code issue when you believe this is a public art issue?
During our planning review, it was told to us that this sign would be an incidental sign and not be part of an art installation. We can go
So-
that approach.
So planning staff said that.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. I think that's answers my questions there. Can I ask questions of staff now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. Mr. Kaza, a question for you. Why were they directed as to go for a sign variance when this seems like it could be a public art? Why wouldn't they go through that process instead?
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. So first on the issue of public art is art that is owned by the city, and the city maintains and owns it in perpetuity. We do have a program for that. The Orchard already has satisfied their public art requirement, and the city no longer requires to take public art or require a developer to provide public art for that instance. In this instance, the city did not want to take ownership of these horses or statues. In the issue of why were they directed to apply as a sign, this meets the definition of a sign in the city's newly adopted sign regulations. That definition is provided in the agenda memo, and I would be happy to read it aloud if you'd like.
Yeah, I think you should read it aloud.
Sure. It's from section 111116 of the Westminster Municipal Code. Sign: any object, device, flag, display, structure, or part thereof situated outdoors or indoors that is used to advertise, identify, display, direct, or attract attention to an object, person, institution, organization, business, product, service, event, or location by any means, including but not limited to words, letters, figures, designs, symbols, fixtures, colors, illumination, or projected images. A sign includes the sign structure. So under that definition, we determined that these are signs as part of that guiding, part of guiding that knowledge was understanding that they are a trademark of the business. They are included at many of their business locations. Not all of their business locations, but many of their business locations. To us, we see these very much as the same as, and I mentioned this also as well in the board here, it's the same thing as a dinosaur statue for the Sinclair brand, that gas station, or the ampersand statues for the Come and Go, or even the arches for McDonald's.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, I assume then that the balls in front of Target then were permitted as signs then from the city?
I do not believe that the balls are trademarks of the Target brand. And
They seem like they could be. So you're saying if it's a trademark, then you're considering it a sign.
no, that's not correct. That was part of our analysis to understand if this is used as a device to attract attention specifically to their business.
But wouldn't the bollards at Target do the same thing?
That's, I think, a subjective thought there on whether a bollard would do that.
I'm just struggling here to figure out why we're here.
Well, I guess I would ask the question is, do the red bollards at a gas station attract attention to the gas station?
Well, they may attract attention at the gas station, but the Target balls definitely are in a circular shape like the Target branding is.
Sure. I will acknowledge that the Target has balls
Okay.
or bollards.
I understand. Okay. I think I've answered all my questions for the moment.
Commissioner McConnell.
Thank you, Chair Boshert. Jacob, I have another question. See, we were talking about the 10-foot setback. What is that a setback from? And where is it located on one of the overheads?
Can we go back to, I think it's slide 5 of the staff presentation? Okay. Okay, one slide, yes, this one. So the setback in this for the incidental sign is 10 feet for signs of 6 square feet and 15 feet for signs above 6 square feet. So the actual setback would be 60 for a 40 square foot sign or anything above 6 feet, they would need to have it 15 feet from the property line. And so this is measured from the property line, which is that dashed image that you see there.
Okay.
I don't know that I agree with the applicant that moving it 10 feet or even 15 feet back would be in the way of the trees based off this image that they have shown. They show the trees a lot closer to the building. I do see some other trees as landscaping there. But that was part of the original design of the orchard, was to have trees behind that monument sign. Hope I answered your question, Chairperson.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Commissioner Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is from Mr. Connor. Is it Con? I'm sorry. Or Mr. Harris. Why not just build the horses to 7 feet high?
Pechang's has done that in the past. It's just not impactful. We do have a 7-foot. There is a 7-foot horse that they have put on the ground, and it kind of just looks like a pony, and it doesn't give you that impactful, impressive feeling like when you're walking up to some, amazing piece of architecture. Like if you go to, I don't know, Rome or Washington, D.C., you have these big columns and you feel like you're in this kind of expansive place. It's kind of the same. It's not the same, but you're walking up to an impressive statue. You kind of want to be immersed in it. And if it's 8 feet tall or 7 feet tall, it's not impactful.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jacob. Does the city have any requirements or recommendations about the trees that have been mentioned? Are they required to keep them, or do you have any regulations?
Thank you, Chairperson. So the city does have regulations on trees. So generally, if it's an existing tree, we require it to be preserved on the site. However, as long as they are meeting the overall quantity of trees needed, which is 1 per 550 square feet of landscaped area, then oftentimes we allow them, especially in commercial shopping centers, to remove trees as needed and replace them. I do believe they removed at least 2 trees for the development itself.
Would the city allow one of these 2 trees to be removed in this case?
I think we'd have to take a little closer look at it just to make sure that they're meeting the regulations of that landscaping.
Okay,
regulations.
thank you.
Rather not.
Right. I think you've answered that one. Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Zhang?
Yeah, I have a few questions. I got was lost in the presentation. So with the setback, if Pechang was willing to move it back, the city would approve. Would the city be in support of that if they were to move the statues back from the setback? I'm not sure if I'm wording that correctly.
So there are three main issues with these as we define them. So one being the height, the second being the overall area. So there's total maximum area for all incidental signs that they're allowed to have. And then the last one being the setback. I wouldn't say that one outweighs the other as far as what the city would be. City staff would be in support of. Generally, we're here because we don't find that they meet the criteria for approval for 2 of the 2 criteria of the 6 that they must meet.
And the next question is for both Jacob and the applicant. You referenced that it's more of an art design, but then you talked about the impact that it would have on potentially the consumer base. Would you say that this is going to affect your revenue?
I don't see it when we talk about impact. I don't see it impacting revenue, impacting sales. I think it impacts the overall experience that our guests have and enjoy when they come to the restaurant. And, you know, many different restaurants and businesses, you know, there's great photo opportunities and ones that separate themselves from others. And we believe that our horses are part of the overall experience. It really taps into the Asian history and it's just a part of the overall guest experience. And you know, my location that we have on the Las Vegas Strip in Las Vegas is a huge photo op, and it's from 8 in the morning, 4 hours before we open until hours after we close. There's somebody in front of those horses taking pictures all night, and we just feel like it's just a part of the overall experience, more so than it is about generating extra revenue. People aren't going to go to P.F. Chang's because there's a horse out front, but it's going to enhance their experience. And you know, our restaurant is very event driven, you know, celebration driven concept. And when people celebrate together, they love to take pictures. And there's nothing better than being out in front of those warrior horses taking pictures. And you know, I believe that the sign is what brings the sign, or the location brings people into the building. The horses add to that overall experience.
And then for Jacob, assuming this moves forward in whatever capacity, how do you think, because in the staff analysis, it says that allowing the variance for PF Chang, the sign would potentially give it an unfair advantage for other restaurants. And is that?
Sure, Commissioner. So a lot of brands use objects, devices to advertise their brand or to create some sort of brand identity. I think we've heard the applicant use that term today. There's across the highway is, I think it's called a Happy Sumo, and they have a giant Japanese, or I don't know, he's a sumo wrestler, and it's a giant statue they have there. If we see this happen, and we already know that we get requests on the regular from businesses to install larger signs than what the sign code allows, and they get a variance for this tonight, our concern promptly is that everybody will look at that and say, P.F. Chang's has a giant statue. Why can't I have my giant statue?
I do have a quick point of clarification. So if the P.F. Chang's met the setback, it still would not be enough for the city to support this.
Correct. So the setback is just one of the 3 variance requests. So the other 2, can we move one slide from here? Sorry, the other direction. I'm probably wrong on the direction anyway. Oh yes, it's right here. Thank you. So there are 3 specific variance, 3 components to this variance request. So one is that one of the signs encroaches into that 10-foot setback. That other sign on the northeast corner of the building also meets that 15 feet. So that sign is not affected by a setback issue for height or for size. The second issue is the height. So both of the signs exceed the maximum allowable height for incidental signs. And the last issue is the cumulative total sign area. So all incidental signs are lumped together in the sign area maximum. So we do this so that way, so each business can tailor their incidental sign needs to themselves. And so we don't restrict it per individual sign. So they have a total pool they can devote to certain signs. So they're allowed a cumulative maximum of 40 square feet, and they would like to go to 268. So just the setback alone, the city would not support that request still. City staff, I should say.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Oh yes, Commissioner Calling.
So Jacob, keep getting caught up. My question is relative to this piece of this item that sits out in the landscape that in my mind doesn't look like a sign. And I understand the sign code definition of sign. To me, this feels like a piece of art because it's more substantial. It's really eye-catching. I'm struggling with that we're evaluating it based on sign because it doesn't have any words on it. And even the fact that there's two of them on opposite ends of the property, even to me makes them look more unique because they're by themselves. I'm struggling that if we can't make this public art, is there any way this could be considered private art and not be considered a sign? Or is it just too much that this is the same horse they put everywhere and you feel like it's too much of a icon? Because to me, it feels like art.
Yes, Commissioner Calling. So the city does not have a specific allowance for how much private art someone could have on their property. The reason why we're here tonight is that the city staff has identified that this meets the city's sign regulations as a sign, and it can be regulated as a sign.
Is there anything that would make this be considered a piece of art? If the applicant changed their opinion of this or identified it as art, would that change anything here tonight?
I would say principally because this is a key component of their brand. I, again, equate it back to either the dinosaur for the Sinclair or another one. This is a directly, and I would go back to the code. It directs or attracts attention to a business. That is the staff's opinion of what this statute does.
It just feels like this is more of a monument or an icon versus, or an art versus sign. I'm struggling with that part of it. And I understand that's what staff's calling it, but that's my concern. Because if it wasn't a sign and it was art, then we would be having this conversation of the sign. So I'm sorry, that really was more of a statement than a question. Thank you.
Sure.
This is really applicants. Lawrence had asked this, but I just want to clarify. So there's no way that PF Chain would be willing to make the statute smaller, right? You're not going to budge on that?
You know, I have a chain, PF Chang's to go concept that we just opened here in Colorado for the first time. The first location was in Glendale. And we have.
Excuse me. Could I ask you to please speak into the microphone?
Yeah. And we have a mini horse down there, and it's just almost irrelevant. It just doesn't have that impactful wow statement.
Okay. So, but just outside that, revenues are affected, things still operate normally.
It's not impacted.
Okay.
I don't believe it is. Again, I think it's all about the experience that our guests have grown accustomed to. And you know, this location's right in between Loveland and Broomfield, where we have full-size horses in front of both locations, and we're building in Northfield. So we're going to be in the middle of the triangle here in Westminster. We'll be the only location in that triangle that won't have the horses if we're not approved.
Yeah.
And again, I just think it's part of the overall experience. If you have dined with your family there, I'm venturing to guess there's been some pictures in front of the horses.
Any Commissioner McConnell?
Almost, huh? So I have a question for the applicant. So we talked about the pony-sized horses, right, and having them in different locations. But for the locations that you just mentioned, Loveland, Broomfield, Park Meadows, I guess I would include in that. Are you aware of any size of the monument battles that have erupted because of the size of the horses at those locations?
I've had these locations for almost 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from Commission?
Chair Boschert, Mr. McConnell would like to speak. He is virtual with us tonight.
The other Mr. McConnell.
John, they're looking around for you. John, go ahead and speak.
I don't see him. Okay, yes.
Yeah, here I am. And I'm sorry I couldn't be with you tonight. You know, I love coming to the Planning Commission and being there in person. So being remote is not my preferred mode of operation. I thought I would add just a couple of clarifying things based on some of the questions that you have. As you can see, sign regulation is very challenging. You might recall the city adopted a new sign code probably just over a year ago at this point. In part, that sign code was intended to simplify our sign regulations, make them a little more user-friendly and easy to understand. It also addressed the changing evolution of sign regulation and Supreme Court decisions relative to speech and sign regulations. And so some years ago, and I'll preface this with saying a lot of cities had to revise their sign codes because some years ago, the Supreme Court decided that cities couldn't regulate signage based on content. In other words, we can't say, oh, that's a real estate sign because it says house for sale, and therefore it has to be a certain size or a certain number, and your for rent sign can be a different size or a different number of signs. And so that really muddied the water and made it very challenging to regulate signs. And so that kind of plays into this too. That's why a sign definition has to be written the way it is. It has to include language that indicates that any sort of device, such as this horse statue, that is intended to attract the attention of a person off the premises to come onto the premises to seek services, or in this case, a meal. And so I bring that up just because that's sort of the background of why the sign regulations are written the way they are now. And so, and jumping back to, there was a question about Target. Our sign code that we're evaluating this against, again, was only adopted a little over a year ago. Prior to that, we had a sign code that for large scale properties allowed those developments to virtually create their own set of codes for their development. And so what that created, it was over the years, was created a very uneven playing field where, for instance, Target or Walmart or Lowe's or some of the bigger footprints and bigger developments got more signage than the other guys did. And so this code not only rectified recent Supreme Court decisions based on content, but it also took steps further to make sure that the sign code was equally applied to all businesses. As you know, businesses tend to look at their signage, and this is based on many years of experience in the planning profession. It's sort of a competitive thing. I'm not suggesting that in this particular circumstances. I'm making a general statement. And so there is a concern of equity across the board, just like other land use regulations. All these regulations are designed to treat everybody fairly. Everybody has a level playing field, I should say. And so when deviations happen, and of course that is in your full discretion to grant this variance, then other businesses in the community, as Mr. Kaza mentioned, may look at this and say, well, I want the same thing. And so that's where we are very cautious, and we want to caution the Planning Commission that that's what we mean by it could undermine the effectiveness of a sign code. Because if different sizes and heights and locations of signs happen unequally, then we're going to have a hard time regulating or establishing and enforcing a rule of any type. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but wanted to add a little bit of background and clarity of it. It is a tough thing to regulate signs and to make these decisions. But of course, all parties here do respect the Planning Commission's decision, whatever it is.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions from the Commission? Commissioner Colley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McConnell, I have a question for you. Is there any circumstance where this horse could be considered part of the architecture of the building, and that not so much a sign, but part of the architecture? similar to the way the Capitol has a dome down in downtown Denver. People take pictures in front of the Capitol all the time. That's not considered a sign. It's part of the architecture. Is there any way that this could be considered part of the architecture?
Well, so our design guidelines that have been in play for many decades now have really avoided franchise architecture. In Westminster, we've really tried hard over many years to create the identity of Westminster. And Westminster's goal has never been to erase the identities of corporations, but we've always asked them to blend in with Westminster's identity so that we don't look like any place. And so I think if we were to look at this as integration into architecture, it would then go into the arena of franchise architecture. It would be probably a harder conversation if this particular statue wasn't their trademark that's registered. If they were creating some unique piece of art that had no relation to their branding or trademark, then it would be a little tougher having this conversation. It still might have, but this is the interesting part. Then we get into content. Is it art? Is it a sign? So that's why the sign code's written very broadly to include devices like this. And in this case, considering it is a registered trademark, we did feel very comfortable saying that it is definitely a sign. We really can't call it something else.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions from the commission, I will open the public testimony at this time. Anyone who wishes to speak and has signed up will be called, or if you wish to speak immediately, please come forward.
I speak one more point.
Let me close the public testimony first, if I see no one.
We do have a virtual speaker.
Okay.
Mr. Gray Stogner, I'm going to move you over into our meeting. Mr. Stogner, are you with us? Mr. Stogner, are you able to hear us? And unmute yourself. Mr. Stogner, are you able to join us in the meeting? Okay, Chair Boschert, I'm not getting a response, so I'll leave if you'd like to leave the public testimony open for another minute, or how you'd like to handle it.
I'm going to ask one last time, if there's anyone who wishes to speak, please come forward. Seeing none, I am at this time going to close the public testimony. And the applicant wishes to speak in rebuttal.
Yeah, I would just like to make a point of emphasis that as we don't see the horses as a sign that draws the guests to our building. The horse that's in the front of the building is completely in a spot that's not visible to traffic on the highway or on the side street, where it appears that the horse that's by the setback in the back could potentially be used as a sign to draw guests. And so with that being the case, would there be any appetite for allowing us to have the horse in the front of the building to, to go with that, the art and the guest experience, since we don't view that as a sign and don't view it as a draw to the building. So consumers that are driving into the center won't see a horse in the back and won't see us until they see our sign on the side of the building that's illuminated.
So you're asking if you reduced it to one statue, would it be amenable to the city? Jacob, I think you'll need to address that.
Even if it was one of the statues, they would still exceed two of the variance criteria, both the height and the size.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we've taken all the testimony, unless applicant has any more rebuttal. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just introduce myself. I'm John Polium with the National Sign Vendor. So I work with hundreds of municipalities with sign variances and code requirements. So I appreciate the careful consideration of this process, because I know that, as was mentioned by the Commissioner McConnell, it's challenging for any municipality to really not only write a code that governs well, but also to administer it well. So we thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. With that in mind, we can entertain a motion on this item. And remember, we can have discussion after the motion is in front of us. Do we have anyone interested in making a motion? Commissioner Dunn.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Planning Commission deny this request for a sign variance for an incidental sign for the setback, height, and the sign area, because the variance does not meet 2 of the 6 criteria required for a sign variance. The criteria not met were the first and second, as the Planning Commission finds that no special circumstances or conditions of the lot exist, and that the sign regulations would be weakened by approval of this variance.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Greg, I need to ask a point of order here. Can the chairman second a motion?
Yes, the chair can second a motion.
Okay. Commissioner McConnell.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a second. Now we can entertain any discussion on this item that we would wish to engage in. Commissioner Dunn.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, I'm really at a crossroads on this motion, and I'll tell you why. At first blush, I don't see anything wrong with giving P.F. Chang its horses. You guys have met 4 of the 6 criteria that we are discussing here for a variance, and normally that would lean me towards your point of view. The reason I don't particularly want to pass this motion is because, well, there are a couple of reasons. But the main reason is the second criteria, and that is the weakening of the sign regulations. Now, this may be nothing, and it could be everything. And I say that because my main concern about granting this variance is that it could open the floodgates. And no offense, Mr. Khan, but I don't want the orchard to look like the Vegas Strip. I think that, as Mr. McConnell said earlier, it's important to protect our identity as a city. And I think that this is the best way to go about it. Plus, you gentlemen have stated that there would be no impact on your revenues or your sales if, for example, the signs were made closer to regulation height as we prescribe here in Westminster. The art issue is a non-starter for me because this body is not tasked with arguing points of law already determined. Art is art, and signs are signs, and that's what the municipal code says here. So I think that it's just a very nice difference in favor of the city and not in your favor, just because of that possibility that and I could see it happening very easily, that the possibility would open for other businesses in the area, of course, to see what they might consider an advantage by you, and then inundate, as Jacob has already said, the planning office with requests for sign variances. And I would just rather not see that. So I thank you for your presentation, gentlemen, and I hope that something can be done. Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak a little dirty here. This whole process seems to be horse manure. From the start, this seems like clear-cut art and not a sign, even with our definition of signage, which was read into the record. I think that we could even, I think any good wordsmith could pick apart that and make a good argument the other direction. I'm just, I think we're going the wrong way here, and I don't think art shouldn't be put up just because a private developer is doing it and they're going to own it versus the city owning it. I think that's just nonsense. And even before this meeting, an associate planner and two senior planners were talking about the case and even used big air quotes, sign. So they know it's not a sign. So anyhow, that to me, I witnessed this. So pardon me if I'm a little angry that you guys are dealing with sign code issues when this is not a sign issue. This is an art issue, in my view. So you shouldn't even be in front of us. I mean, that's number one. Number two, there was a complaint about the variance, if granted, would not weaken the general purpose of the sign regulations. Well, I have to say that you've met that. I think the city has weakened the spirit of the sign regulations by putting it in a process to which it so obviously does not belong. Period. So, as far as the special circumstances or conditions, the other one where they're denying it, I mean, I don't know how we get there. I mean, vegetation, yeah, there's vegetation there. And so there's that. So we can, but, I'd really be bending the rules here to do it, but I can't, but the motion as written, I can't support, because you definitely met number 2. And honestly, I think you should be appealing to city council or find, there's got to be a way to be able to build your art there that doesn't call it a sign. I think this is just disgusting what the planning department is doing. And I like the people in the planning department. Don't get me wrong. I've worked with them for over a decade on this commission and in other things, and I apologize. But this one really, really, really is upsetting me. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner McConnell. Commissioner Calling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm not quite as upset as Mr. Carpenter, but I see your point of view. And I have a hard time not allowing you to put your horse out there because I do see it as art. Unfortunately, our job here is to go by what the code is. And unfortunately, we have to follow the code that has been written. To me, it feels like the code needs to be changed to allow for things like this because I think unique art like this should be allowed. And it is an icon. It's very cool looking, and I think it would add a lot of value to the property. And I don't think it would detract. So I'm torn on this one. I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do because I would like to support it, but it clearly goes against the code as written. So maybe it's a manner of we need to change the code. But at this point, if I have to follow the code and I have to go with what staff has recommended, denial of this. And I think that's a shame because I really would like to see the horse out there. So that's my 2 cents.
Commissioner McConnell.
Thank you, Chair Boschert. So first thing I'd like to say is that as far as the definition of a sign goes, to include the word figure, right? So I'm assuming, and I wasn't here when the sign, well, I was here, but I didn't partake in the update of the definition and changes to the sign code. But when we talk about a figure, right? I mean, in hindsight, it's easy for me to sit here and say, hey, did we ever do any what if analysis when we wrote this stuff down? And we looked at all the existing businesses in the metro area that if any of these ever wanted to come to Westminster, who would we be ruling out by adopting the code that we did? I mean, that's easy for me to say, but that's the only one. It's like I'm sitting here listening to them like, oh my God, if we'd had, foresight and said, well, maybe we would have tweaked it just a little bit different as to what we were considering a sign and a figure and everything. And I understand and acknowledge the reason to keep size at a reasonable so we don't become like the Las Vegas Strip. And that's as far as the definition goes. But then to the first point that apparently staff and applicant agreed that there was, the surrounding land and topography, there was no impact. As I'm sitting here after asking the question about the 7-foot pony, I'm like, well, even if they were to go 7 foot, and if they moved it into the setback, you wouldn't be able to see the one on 144th because of the trees. And you wouldn't be able to see the one on the northeast corner from, say, up J.C. Penney somewhere because of some of the trees there and the distance away and downhill, and it's 7 foot high, but it would be out of their line of sight. So I would suggest that in fact, the taller horse, the fact that we said it didn't meet criteria, I think that it actually does, because for those signs, sorry, now I'm doing it, for those horses to be visible from a distance, I think they can't be 7 foot high. They must be taller than that. And I think that their standard is 14 feet, and that's fine by me.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, I just wanted to rebut, or not rebut, but point to Commissioner Calling that the motion on the table is both A and B. And I don't think that, so if you don't think that the variance would weaken the sign code, but you may not think that the topography and special circumstances exist, you could still vote against the motion that's on the table right now. So I just wanted to point that out as a point of order because we did that. that way.
Okay. Commissioner Zhang, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think along with the rest of my colleagues, I am pretty conflicted on this. A part of me, it's just a horse and I don't really care. But then the other part of me thinks this is an iconic horse and it, in one way or another, brings people to your table, whether it affects revenue or not. People do come. And so I see the city's point of view in that. And I also think that it, as Commissioner Lawrence referenced, that this could just be a snowball effect, that other businesses will come forward and the city will have things to consider. With that being said, I think with what Commissioner McConnell said was, the city should probably reconsider the sign policies because it's obviously going to affect you and future businesses that may want to come here, but based on this experience, may not want to come here no more. So I am deeply conflicted on this, on whether is this really just a sign or is this just a horse? I do want to note, though, on record that I think the city should start a process to review. I know that Jacob, you referenced that the city just recently updated it. Well, maybe it's time to do analysis and go back and reconsider if the sign is going to have a judgmental effect. I mean, the sign policies for the city will have effect on future businesses. But yeah, I'm conflicted. I'm still pondering on, does this meet qualifications or does not? And that's all I have to say for right now.
Quick comment from myself. This is a very tough question. The horses are astounding and they're beautiful, but the city has to be consistent in its enforcement of the sign code. And they were very sensitive to all forms of signs when they came up with the new code, and I think we need to stick with it. So unless there's any other comments or questions, I'm going to call for a vote on this. Jennifer, can we have a roll call, please?
Just to reiterate, the motion on the floor is in denial. Just
Yes.
putting that on the record again. So Chair Boschert,
I am in favor of the motion.
Vice Chair McConnell,
No.
Commissioner Carpenter,
No.
Commissioner Colling,
No.
Commissioner Lawrence, excuse me, Commissioner Dunn,
Yes.
and Commissioner Zhang.
Yes.
So we have a tie.
I'll break the tie.
Yes. We appreciate your suggestion. Greg, what do we do?
So in the event of a tie, the motion does not pass.
Okay.
So try again.
Okay. Would anyone else like to make a motion on this item? Commissioner Colling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to approve this request for sign variance for an incidental sign for the setback height in the sign area because the variance because I'm not sure how to word this. Because the variance meets the criteria for this application.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second from Commissioner Carpenter. Discussion.
I'm sorry, I didn't see who seconded that.
That was
I didn't recognize your voice. Thank you.
Commissioner Zhang.
Is there a motion for discussion? Or, okay. I'm like, as you can see, I'm torn and lost at the moment. question for staff, Jacob. All right. If we approve this, assuming this approves, or I don't know, what are the odds that other businesses in the Orchard area or in other areas throughout Westminster are going to start coming forward petitioning changes to variance and their signs and et cetera? Like, what have you done? Has staff done the forecast of the potential, like what could come forward?
I'll tell you my anecdotal analysis, Commissioner. We field probably weekly a complaint from somebody who is not granted a sign permit, and they see somebody else has some type of sign and they say, I want that sign. Why can't I have that sign? They already have that sign. Why can't I have that sign? We field that on a basis all the time, probably on a weekly basis. Whether it's a mistake of what the type of sign is, what their zoning district is, how large it is, whether they're even in the city, we field this on a daily basis. And I would guarantee that we will hear somebody mention this sign in particular and say, we want the same thing.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of things I see here on, first, thank you, Commissioner McConnell, for helping me get across the hump of the topography and vegetation and visibility of the signage there. I don't believe this is going to weaken it, and here's why. Because number one, again, I believe this is art, not a sign. So if everybody in Westminster wants to come out and build their own statue with no name of their business or anything else on it for the public art, I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, look at Athens, Greece. I mean, it's full of statues that people built for reasons, and they weren't all branded signs. I mean, the city can build or have other people build public art. I mean, we've got public art on City Hall property and the Buck that's over at Target. And I could go to the website and I'm sure there's a half dozen public ones there. So if we have to approve a variance for that, I think we would look at that a lot different than somebody coming through with a branded sign for a specific purpose. I think I think we're comparing apples and orangutans here. So in the end of the day, I get your slippery slope argument, but I just don't see it quite as slippery. I get that everyone's going to be asking for variances, and they still will be. But this isn't. I'm not sure that just because we may have to have another sign hearing some night doesn't mean, if it gets that far, I don't think that's reason to deny it. So I'm in favor, and I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Young?
Oh, no.
Commissioner McConnell?
Thank you, Chair Boschert. I mean, I do to a certain extent understand the slippery slope point of view, but then I also have to take into consideration that how many locations does P.F. Chang's have now? Right, 200 plus. So we're talking about maybe a restaurant, a business or something that has 1 or 2 or 3 locations. It's like, this is, an iconic symbol of a restaurant chain that has over 200 outlets. And to me, that's a huge difference, right? We're not approving. I lost my train of thought there. I understand the slippery slope discussion, but I don't think it's going to be as disastrous as maybe some of us do say.
Commissioner Calling?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Kaiser, the applicants that you have come forward that ask for signage, they would have to go through the same signage variance in front of us, assuming they came forward and wanted to do something similar. So we would have the opportunity to either approve or deny those as well based on the current code. So it's a very unique situation if we approve this and then maybe in the future don't approve something else, correct? I mean, we still have the opportunity to review it. That's why we have a planning commission to review things, right?
If future city staff follow the city code and it doesn't change in the meantime, yes.
Which if you're bombarded with questions, it might trigger that change sooner than later, maybe.
Yes, we often see instances where certain businesses have signs and other businesses desire similar signage or the equal opportunity to that same amount of signage, that they will then go lobby for additional signage. And then alternatively, we constantly see lobbying for more
Sure.
signs.
The sign code is a very difficult thing, and I get it, and it's always been an issue. But I think when we're discouraging good quality businesses from coming forward and being in Westminster, I would want to promote those. So I guess I still support this artwork at this location.
Question for applicants. You had referenced that horses exist, or whatever we call this, statues, whatever. Broomfield location, correct?
Correct.
The Loveland location, correct? And
Our future Northfield.
okay, Northfield. Okay. Hypothetical question. I know that your team had referenced that if you place the horse inside the restaurant, that then will affect business, correct?
Yeah, and adversely, I would think.
Okay.
But if it's appropriate, I'd like to respond to a comment you made earlier when you said that it was iconic and felt like that did bring guests to our restaurant. If you are in fact correct, then it would detour our guests from dining in Westminster when they have the opportunity to go to Broomfield 10 minutes away. So if you are correct, then you feel like that does have a draw for the business, then I think it's a deterrent for Westminster area because our guests would then choose to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
To a neighboring location.
Neighboring location. Okay. And then, so in my little world, I would like the city and the applicant to compromise, but that's my little world. I know someone had referenced the Denver location. Does Denver location have a horse?
It does not. It sits right on 15th Street.
15th
So there's a
Street.
sidewalk. And
Oh,
it's all
okay. It's a
separated
tight,
from
yeah.
market. And so there's no possible place to have put a horse.
Okay. Well, that is the only question I have for right now as I continue to think about this.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will ask for a vote. Can we get a roll call, please?
This motion is to request the sign variance. Approve,
To
excuse
approve
me,
the sign
approve
variance.
the sign variance request.
That is
Sorry.
correct.
Okay, Chair Boschert,
I am against.
Vice Chair McConnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Colling,
Yes,
Commissioner Zhang.
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn.
No.
Okay, the current motion passes 4-2. So we are sending this, or does this go on to the city council? No. Okay, then the variance has been approved. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Jacob. Do we have any old business? Do we have any miscellaneous business? Nope. In that case, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.